Hi, let's talk about the new HSK 79 levels advanced exam. The very first time it was available for the, general audience, I guess you would say, was just last weekend. So 2022 November. And of course, I had to take this test and see what it's all about. In my previous video, I already described how I was preparing for this exam and how the mock exam went. But last weekend was time for the actual exam, and I want to share how that exam different from the mock exam and what I felt was the same. Overall, I have to say that the difficulty of the actual exam was, I would say, significantly higher than the mock exam. Or it could be just there was so many different topics because you had the real amount of questions. Whereas in the mock exam, you had less questions and less topics that you had to be fluent in. But let's go through one by one. In listening, we had topics, for example, literature, business negotiations, winter sports. I think in general the difficulty was similar with the mock exam and just a little bit above HSK 6 level. What makes it tricky is that in listening, reading, writing, you have such a variety of topics that you have to be fluent in. So you have to make sure that you are reading and listening to materials not just on your favorite topics, but a wide variety of topics as well. In the reading part, we had different topics again, for example, related to marine life and Tulo architecture. And the reading I felt was significantly more difficult than in the mock exam. You had more questions, more text to read. So the time was definitely an issue, and I did feel rushed going through it. In the end, I did have a couple of minutes to check things, but as I was going through my answers and checking them, I noticed in that exercise where you have to put the paragraphs in the correct order, is that I probably left out the wrong paragraph. There's one paragraph you are not supposed to include, and I think I might have included that by accident. But I was looking at that little red time on the corner and I realized I did not have enough time to change my answer there. So reading, you have to be able to read quickly. You have to be able to scan the text. You do not have time to read everything. More like checking on the questions and then finding the answers from the text. Then for writing, we had quite similar than in the mock exam. First one was again survey results, and then second one was an opinion piece on Confucius saying on what you don't want for yourself, don't force it to others either. So I think this was similar to the mock exam. In written translation, we had different topics. Shorter one on talking about things that my family has. So this was more like everyday translation. The second one was a bit more technical. It was about flying cars. Yes. So it was text about flying cars and comparing them to regular cars and planes and the advantages that they have. We then had a lot more vocabulary that I was not quite as familiar with. But all in all, the listening, writing, and written translation, I felt the hardest thing was in reading just the amount of text and questions you have to read in that time limit. So you have to really rush through it to make sure you get to answer all of those questions. Well, after this was part for the spoken exam, which started with the oral translation, which has two different texts, one of them being about the Silk Road. And this again included more historical vocabulary that was needed. And I think the topics here for the oral translation were a bit more advanced than in the mock exam, but I was better prepared. Last time I almost completely froze when I was looking at that English text and trying to translate it into Chinese. But this time I knew what kind of strategy I wanted to use. So during that time that they give you to prepare, I carefully read through the whole English text. pointing out some of the differences in the word order between English and Chinese. And then when I started interpreting it, I just read one sentence at a time and then translated that into Chinese. So it was a lot slower, but I feel that way I was able to translate a lot more of it, definitely a lot more than in the mock exam. So having that good strategy definitely helps you in the oral translation. Next one we had a speaking. The first one, more practical part, was giving instructions and encouragement for a group of medical volunteers going to different villages. This was again more challenging topic than in the mock exam, but I felt it was still okay. And the instructions were given based on text material that was on the screen. And after that, you had to think of your own encouragement that you could say to the group. Next one in speaking, there was a long listening about popular science. And after that, you had to answer questions in spoken form. Now, this again is with technology, science-based text, so it had a lot more vocabulary I'm not quite as familiar with, as I'm most familiar with, education related, for example, or culture. So this was a challenging text indeed. And finally, we had a story on how you always come back to your roots, and then you have to talk about that, your opinions on this topic for 2 to 3 minutes. Last time I found this to be really the hardest of all of these parts in the exam, but I came with a plan. So I had decided no matter what the 2 to 3 minutes speech was going to be about and what I had to talk, I would structure it in a certain way. So I would first introduce the topic and then say, okay, now I will start sharing my ideas. And then after that, I would separate my point of view into 3 points. So the are, the sen. And for each of them, I would think of some example from my own life as well. And then at the end would have a conclusion. So this way, no matter what the topic for the speaking part would be, I would have this structure in my head already. And I did know this, it helped a lot on being able to talk more. Whereas in last time, I froze quite a bit and I did not full those whole 2 minutes, definitely not at all. So this time again is the strategy, same as for the oral translation. And for the speaking, it's important to have this certain strategy in mind on how to interpret or how to kind of give a speech for 2 to 3 minutes to have the structure in your mind. So in general, I would say it was more demanding than the mock exam. But after having the mock exam, I was so much more prepared for this exam. I would have failed terribly if I didn't have the chance to do the mock exam. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity. In the mock exam video, I also go through these different sections in more detail on what kind of a question types they are. So if you're interested, then check out that video. Now, then comes the question of when do the results come from this HSK 79 levels advanced exam? Now, unfortunately, the test organization said that the results probably come after Chinese New Year. So that being at the end of January, so results might come sometime February, March. So in the meantime, just have to kind of forget about it and then just patiently wait for the results. Well, thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any questions about the HSK 7 to 9 new advanced exam, just leave a comment below and I'll be happy to answer.